the command bridge of the Galactic Alliance's flagship, Triumphant Accord, hummed with quiet efficiency, its crystalline surfaces reflecting the soft blue glow of tactical displays. Captain Rico stood before the main hologram projector, her six-fingered hands clasped behind her back, studying the three-dimensional star chart that showed the current positions of all Alliance fleets. The war had been going poorly, not catastrophically, but enough to make every senior officer question their fundamental assumptions about warfare itself. "Status report?" Rico commanded, her voice carrying the particular tone that had earned her respect throughout the fleet. She was Zephyrian, a species known for their analytical minds and strategic brilliance. Their pale blue skin seemed to shimmer with concentration as they processed complex battle scenarios that would overwhelm most other species. Commander Thylos, her second-in-command, manipulated the holographic interface with practiced ease. "The humans have taken Sector 7 Alpha. 3 more outposts fell yesterday. Our losses continue to mount, Captain." Rico's antennae twitched, a sign of deep concern among her people. When the Alliance had first encountered humanity 6 months ago, they had been dismissed as a minor species. Primitive by galactic standards, barely capable of faster-than-light travel, wielding technology that seemed centuries behind the most basic Alliance equipment. Their military doctrine appeared chaotic, their strategies unpredictable to the point of seeming random. That assessment had proven catastrophically wrong. "How many ships did they lose in the process?" Rico asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "None, Captain. They somehow managed to disable our defensive grid using what appears to be a modified mining laser and something they call a redneck engineering solution." Rico closed her 4 eyes and took a deep breath. The humans had an infuriating tendency to achieve impossible victories using methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They didn't follow established protocols, didn't respect the unwritten rules that had governed galactic conflict for millennia. Instead, they fought with a combination of desperate creativity and stubborn refusal to acknowledge when they were outmatched. A chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The hologram shifted to show Admiral Velkon, Supreme Commander of the Alliance forces, his crystalline features betraying unusual concern. "Captain Rico," the Admiral began without preamble, "I'm afraid the situation has deteriorated further. The human forces have somehow convinced the Mechanical Brotherhood to switch sides." If Rico had been human, she might have cursed. As a Zephyrian, she simply allowed her antennae to droop slightly. "How is that possible, Admiral?" "The Mechanical Brotherhood has been our ally for 300 years. Apparently, the humans offered them something we couldn't: entertainment. They challenged the Brotherhood to a contest they called robot fighting, see, and somehow this led to a complete diplomatic reversal. On the other side of the galaxy, Lieutenant John Manning crouched in the ruins of what had once been a Zephyrian communications outpost. Around him, his squad of 30 humans maintained watch, while their engineer Corporal Sarah Williams worked her particular brand of magic on the alien technology. "How much longer, Williams?" Manning asked quietly into his comm unit. "Almost got it, LT. Just need to convince this quantum encryption matrix to play nice with my trusty multi-tool." Williams was what the old Earth military had called a military brat, raised on 20 different worlds as her parents moved from base to base. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to make any technology work regardless of its origin. Manning nodded and returned his attention to the tactical situation. His squad was technically outgunned, outmanned, and completely surrounded by enemy forces. By any reasonable military standard, they should have surrendered hours ago. But Manning had learned something important during his years in the Earth Colonial Marines. Humans didn't fight by reasonable standards. The breakthrough had come when humanity's greatest military minds had sat down to analyze their situation. Earth had been invaded. Its population scattered across a dozen refugee worlds, its military shattered. The Galactic Alliance had offered them a choice: submit and become a protectorate species, or resist and be conquered. Earth had chosen a third option, making everyone regret forcing the choice in the first place. Got it, Williams announced triumphantly. The alien technology flickered and hummed as she patched her improvised interface into its core systems. Their entire defensive grid is now routing through my laptop, and before you ask, yes, I found their off switch. Manning grinned, a predatory expression that his enemies were learning to fear. Outstanding. Execute Phase 2. What happened next would have horrified military tacticians throughout the galaxy. Williams didn't simply disable the defense grid, she turned it against its creators, reprogramming the sophisticated Zephyrian AI to recognize Alliance ships as targets while broadcasting obscure Earth music over all frequencies. Are they playing something called Sweet Home Alabama while conducting an orbital bombardment? Asked Lieutenant Colonel Zirith, observing the battle from a safe distance. It appears so, replied her aide, consulting his sensor readings. The human tactical pattern is completely illogical. They're using their own disabled vessels as improvised projectiles while their marine units are those battle cries? What does YOLO mean? Zareth could only watch in mounting horror as the humans systematically demolished a defensive position that should have held indefinitely. She had spent decades studying military history, had written treatises on the elegant art of galactic warfare. This wasn't warfare. This was chaos given form and purpose. The truth was, humanity had approached the problem of being outgunned and outmatched with the same innovative thinking that had once allowed them to dominate their own world. If conventional tactics didn't work, they would invent unconventional ones. If they couldn't win through superior technology, they would win through superior stubbornness. Sir, Williams called out, I've accessed their communication network. You want to hear something funny? Manning raised an eyebrow. In the middle of a combat zone, Williams had developed a habit of finding humor in the strangest places. They're calling us unpredictable and impossible to strategize against, she continued with a grin. Apparently, our fighting style is so chaotic that their predictive algorithms can't model our behavior. Well, Manning replied, checking his rifle. That's probably because we don't model our own behavior. This was the fundamental misunderstanding that had doomed the Alliance's efforts. They had tried to fight humans like they fought other civilized species, with rules, protocols, and predictable strategies. But humans had spent millennia fighting each other, developing a military tradition that prized adaptability above all else. A human commander might send troops into battle with orders like, take that hill and figure out how when you get there. An Alliance commander would spend weeks developing detailed tactical plans that could handle every conceivable contingency. The problem was, humans specialized in inconceivable contingencies. As Manning's squad prepared to move to their next objective, the galaxy was beginning to learn a fundamental truth about warfare. When humans went to war, they didn't just fight to win, they fought to ensure that their enemies would never want to fight them again. 3 days later, Captain Rico found herself staring at intelligence reports that defied explanation. A single human platoon had infiltrated a maximum security Alliance research facility, stolen critical technology, and escaped by launching themselves out of an airlock using emergency thruster packs designed for spacewalks. They used maintenance equipment as rocket engines, she asked her intelligence officer, Dr. Venn, hoping she had misunderstood. Yes, Captain. And they synchronized their amateur rocketry with precision timing that suggests either incredible luck or... Dr. Venn paused, consulting his notes. What they call Florida Man physics. Rico had been hearing more about this mysterious Florida Man phenomenon. Apparently, it referred to a subset of humanity capable of achieving impossible feats through a combination of desperation, creativity, and complete disregard for safety protocols. The worst part was that it seemed to be contagious. Other human populations were beginning to exhibit similar behaviors. Reports spoke of a group calling themselves Texas Engineers, who had somehow convinced a neutron star to change its rotation by sending it strongly worded letters in 17 different languages, including several they had invented for the purpose. Captain Commander Thylos interrupted her thoughts. Admiral Velkon is requesting an emergency conference. The humans have issued a formal declaration. The main screen activated, showing not just Admiral Velkon, but representatives from every major power in the galaxy. The tension was palpable. This was unprecedented. Humanity, barely a year ago considered a primitive backwater species, now commanded enough attention to call a galactic conference. A new face appeared on screen, a middle-aged human male with graying hair and eyes that held far too much amusement for someone in the middle of a war. He introduced himself as General Harrison Pike, Supreme Commander of Human Expeditionary Forces. Ladies, gentlemen, and miscellaneous sentient beings. General Pike began with a smile that made every non-human in the room uncomfortable. I'm here to inform you that Earth's High Command has made a decision. We didn't want this war, but since you insisted on it, we've decided to show you how humans really fight when we're properly motivated. The assembled representatives exchanged glances. What they had seen so far wasn't how humans really fought. To date, Pike continued, we've been operating under what we call proportional response protocols. We've been holding back, trying to minimize casualties, attempting to conduct this war according to your civilized rules. His smile widened. But last week, one of your fleets attacked a human civilian transport. There were children on that ship. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. So effective immediately, Earth's military forces are switching to what we call maximum effort mode. I felt it was only fair to warn you. Admiral Velkon, attempting to maintain diplomatic decorum, asked, and what exactly does maximum effort entail, General Pike? Well, Pike replied, pulling up a holographic display. Phase 1 involves what we're calling creative applications of existing technology. For instance, have you ever wondered what happens when you detonate a warp core inside a folded space-time bubble? Several representatives paled visibly. Phase 2, Pike continued cheerfully, involves biological warfare, not the boring kind with viruses and such. We're talking about introducing kudzu to your agricultural worlds and teaching your youth about something called punk rock. And Phase 3, asked a brave crystalline diplomat. Well, that would be telling, wouldn't it? But I will say this, it involves a lot of glitter and something humanity calls weaponized bureaucracy. The conference call ended in stunned silence. In the days that followed, the Alliance frantically tried to prepare for these new threats, but found themselves facing an enemy that didn't just think outside the box. They had apparently forgotten that boxes existed in the first place. Manning, now promoted to Major, for his exploits, found himself leading the first implementation of General Pike's new directives. His mission: infiltrate and capture the Alliance's primary strategic planning facility on Kepler Prime. Remember, he told his expanded battalion as they prepared for insertion, our job isn't just to win this. Our job is to win it in a way that makes them never want to fight us again. Sergeant Rodriguez, one of his most experienced NCOs, raised her hand. Sir, what's the specific directive for this operation? Manning consulted his orders. Direct quote from command. Show them what happens when Americans stop being polite and start being creative. The assault on Kepler Prime would later be studied in military academies throughout the galaxy, though most instructors would preface their lectures with warnings about the psychological trauma some students experienced when trying to comprehend human tactical flexibility. The operation began conventionally enough, a series of coordinated strikes designed to eliminate outer defenses and create confusion. But then Manning's forces implemented what became known as the synchronized chaos doctrine. Instead of following predictable patterns, each unit was given broad objectives and told to achieve them using maximum initiative and minimum sanity. The results defied every known principle of military science. One unit infiltrated the base by disguising themselves as a catering service and serving the defenders ethnic Earth food that contained sophisticated nanotechnology. Another group created a distraction by staging what appeared to be an impromptu concert featuring something called death metal, which apparently had sonic properties that disrupted Zephyrian neural processes. But the most devastating assault came from Specialist Jackson, a former NASA engineer who had somehow managed to smuggle in the components for what he called a gravity-powered key opener. Specialist Manning radioed as he watched Jackson's device tear through 3 levels of reinforced armor like it was tissue paper. Report on your progress. Sir, Jackson replied with obvious pride, I have successfully convinced local spacetime that this facility shouldn't exist here anymore. Explain? Well, sir, I've created a localized gravitational anomaly that's making the molecular bonds in the base structure really homesick. Manning shook his head. Only humans would weaponize nostalgia on a subatomic level. As the dust settled and the Alliance forces surrendered, Captain Rico found herself among the prisoners. She had personally led the base's defense, confident that her strategic training and tactical superiority would prevail. Instead, she had been defeated by what the humans had called aggressive architectural criticism. Manning approached her as she sat in the rubble of what had once been the Alliance's most secure facility. Up close, she could see that he wasn't particularly physically impressive. Average height for a human, neither especially strong nor intimidating. But there was something in his eyes that made her antennae twitch nervously. Captain Rico, he said politely, offering her a bottle of water. I'm Major Manning. I wanted to ask you a question. She accepted the water warily. What question? Do you understand now why every species should dread the day humans go to war? Rico looked around at the destruction. Her people's most sophisticated defenses had been overcome by a combination of culinary warfare, sonic disruption, and weaponized physics. I'm beginning to. Manning nodded sympathetically. See, the thing is, we didn't want this war. We were perfectly happy being the weird neighbors who made too much noise and had questionable lawn maintenance practices. But you made it clear that wasn't an option. He sat down next to her, seemingly unbothered by the ongoing chaos, as his troops secured the area, using methods that included interpretive dance and something called aggressive jazz hands. Here's what the Alliance didn't understand, Manning continued. Humans don't fight wars to win them. We fight wars to make sure they end. And we're very good at making things end. Over the following weeks, as humanity's maximum effort campaign continued, the galaxy learned exactly what Manning meant. Human forces didn't just defeat their enemies, they traumatized them into submission. On Rigel 7, a human unit convinced the planet's defensive AI to defect by introducing it to Earth's internet and allowing it to experience memes for the first time. The AI later sent a formal apology to its creators for not knowing what joy was like until now. On the industrial world of Tartarus, human engineers accidentally created a self-replicating robot that only knew how to manufacture rubber ducks and gave them all tiny hats. The psychological impact on the local population was devastating. And on the diplomatic station at Alpha Centauri, humanity's ambassador defeated the entire Galactic Council in a debate by introducing them to Earth's concept of dad jokes, rendering them incapable of serious political discussion for several days. But perhaps the most terrifying display of human warfare came when they introduced biological weapons. Dr. Emily Watson, humanity's chief xenobiologist, stood before the Alliance High Command with a smile that somehow managed to be both friendly and absolutely terrifying. Gentlemen, she began, allow me to introduce you to our latest strategic initiative, Species Integration Project Gamma. The holographic display showed various Earth organisms. The assembled aliens recognized some of them: earthworms, certain types of bacteria, various plants. These organisms, Dr. Watson continued, have been specially modified to form mutually beneficial relationships with alien ecosystems. They're completely harmless. Admiral Velcon leaned forward. Then, how are they weapons? Well, Dr. Watson's smile widened. Let me show you what happens when we introduce Earth's domestic cats to your residential areas. The footage that followed would haunt Alliance military tacticians for generations. Somehow, humanity had figured out how to weaponize cuteness. Their cats didn't destroy enemy infrastructure. They made it irrelevant by becoming so beloved that entire military units abandoned their posts to provide proper care for their new feline overlords. And this, Dr. Watson said, showing another clip, is what we call the Golden Retriever Gambit. The Alliance forces had tried to resist. But how do you maintain military discipline when your enemies have introduced creatures whose sole purpose in life appears to be making everyone happy? Captain Rico, now held in a human prisoner of war facility, found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about warfare. The human detention center wasn't designed to break prisoners. It was designed to educate them. Every day she attended lectures on alternative conflict resolution, taught by humans who had apparently majored in subjects like aggressive kindness and tactical empathy. She learned about Earth's history, about species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of making war so terrible that peace became the only rational choice. The thing about humans, her primary instructor, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, explained during one session, is that we've had 10,000 years to perfect warfare against enemies exactly as smart, creative, and vicious as we are. Fighting aliens with better technology but predictable tactics, that's practically a vacation for us. Rico raised her hand. But how do you maintain unit cohesion when your tactics are so chaotic? Dr. Martinez smiled. Who says they're chaotic? We operate on principles you haven't encountered yet. For instance, have you heard of Murphy's Law? The class shook their heads. Murphy's Law states that anything that can go wrong will go wrong at the worst possible moment. Dr. Martinez explained. Most species try to prevent this. Humans have learned to weaponize it. We plan for everything to go wrong and then figure out how to make that work in our favor. Another prisoner, a Mechanical Brotherhood unit designation, Sigma 7, processed this information with visible confusion. This does not compute. How can failure become success? Let me give you an example, Dr. Martinez said. During the Battle of Kepler Prime, one of our explosive devices failed to detonate. Instead of seeing this as a failure, the operative responsible decided to use it as a hammer. The psychological impact of watching someone use an unexploded key as a manual tool was so profound that the defending force surrendered immediately. The class sat in stunned silence. Or consider the Titan Station incident, the doctor continued. Our forces accidentally shot themselves in the foot during an assault. The local commander decided this was clearly a new form of tactical maneuvering and ordered the entire unit to shoot their own feet. The defenders were so confused by this unexpected strategy that they forgot to activate their shields. Sigma 7's optical sensors flickered rapidly. Your species achieves victory through controlled incompetence. Among other methods, Dr. Martinez agreed cheerfully. Meanwhile, the war continued to escalate in ways that defied conventional understanding. Humanity's Phase 3 protocols had been implemented, and the results were beyond anyone's worst nightmares. The glitter incident alone would require years of therapy for those who witnessed it. Human special forces had somehow weaponized the reflective craft material, creating a substance they called tactical glitter that was impossible to remove and caused severe psychological distress in most species due to its aggressive, sparkly nature. But the bureaucracy weapon was the true terror. Humans had somehow managed to distill their most dysfunctional administrative processes into a form that could be deployed against enemy command structures. Alliance generals found themselves trapped in endless loops of form submissions, each requiring multiple signatures and stamps that didn't exist. General Pike appeared in another galactic broadcast, his expression serene as reports flooded in from across the war zone. I hope everyone is beginning to understand, he said calmly, that when humans go to war, we don't just fight with weapons. We fight with chaos itself. We fight with ideas that shouldn't work but do. We fight with the universe's tendency toward entropy, and somehow convince it to target our enemies specifically. He paused, consulting a tablet. Oh, and we've also recently deployed something called weaponized customer service. Any Alliance vessel that wants to surrender can now email our dedicated hotline, where they'll be placed on hold while listening to what Earth calls easy jazz, until someone can process their request. The psychological strain was beginning to show. Alliance forces reported that their greatest fear wasn't human weapons or tactics. It was the growing suspicion that humans were having fun. And they were right. Humanity had embraced the absurdity of their situation with characteristic adaptability. If the universe wanted them to fight a war against impossible odds, they would fight it with impossible methods. Major Manning, now overseeing the siege of the Alliance stronghold at Proxima Station, reviewed his latest orders with something approaching glee. "All right, people," he announced to his assembled forces. "Command has authorized Operation Rubber Duck. Our objective is simple: convince the enemy that we've gone completely insane and then use their confusion to achieve total victory." Lieutenant Williams raised her hand. "Sir, haven't we already convinced them we're insane?" "True," Manning admitted. "But this is different. This is aggressively, systematically, comprehensively insane. We're going to be so crazy that they'll think the previous crazy was actually secret sanity." The operation that followed would be remembered as the moment when human military creativity achieved what historians would later term peak humanity. The assault began with a coordinated bombardment using the weapons that fired rubber ducks instead of explosive shells. Each duck was equipped with a small speaker playing different songs from Earth's vast musical catalog. The psychological impact of being attacked by thousands of squeaking yellow toys serenading you with everything from opera to death metal was immediate and devastating. While defenders tried to cope with the aquatic waterfowl assault, human ground forces implemented Phase 2, the Great Confusion. Every soldier had been equipped with a different costume representing various Earth professions. Firefighters, chefs, accountants, and professional wrestlers advanced on enemy positions while loudly explaining their day jobs in exhaustive detail. "Remember," Sergeant Rodriguez shouted over the chaos, dressed as a disco-era John Travolta. "Today, we're not soldiers. We're enthusiastic amateurs with a complete lack of professional boundaries." The enemy's communication systems, already strained by the rubber duck serenades, completely broke down when they tried to report that they were under assault by what appeared to be a traveling circus with military-grade weaponry. But the masterpiece of the operation was yet to come. Manning himself approached the station's main entrance, wearing a three-piece suit and carrying a briefcase. He knocked politely on the blast doors. When surprised communications officers answered, Manning smiled and handed them his business card. "Hello, I'm representing Earth Amalgamated Enterprises, and I'd like to speak to someone about your facility's warranty." What followed was a 45-minute presentation on extended warranty options for space stations, during which Manning somehow convinced the defending force that their base was actually Earth property that had been leased to the Alliance and that the lease had expired. By the time the defenders realized they'd been bureaucratically conquered by what was essentially a traveling salesman, human forces had already secured all critical systems using the distraction. The surrender ceremony was conducted with full military honors, which in human tradition apparently included a performance by something called a marching band that played what they described as funeral music, but fun. As Captain Rico was finally released in a prisoner exchange, she found herself face to face with Manning one last time. She had spent months in human custody learning about their culture, their history, their completely insane approach to existence. "Major Manning," she said formally, "I wanted to say, I understand now." Manning raised an eyebrow. "Understand what, Captain?" "Why every species dreads the day humans go to war." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You don't fight wars. You fight reality itself, and somehow convince reality to surrender." Manning smiled, the same friendly, terrifying expression that had haunted Alliance officers throughout the conflict. "Captain, you still don't fully understand. Then explain it to me. We're not fighting reality, Manning said gently. We're showing reality that there are more ways to exist than it thought possible. And usually, reality finds this so interesting that it decides to help us out. Rico stared at him for a long moment, then began to laugh. It was a sound somewhere between hysteria and admiration. You're all completely insane, she said. Probably, Manning agreed. But we're also creative, persistent, and we never ever give up. And now that the war's over, maybe you'd like to see what we do when we're not trying to kill anyone. The peace negotiations that followed would establish humanity as a major galactic power, not through conquest, but through the sheer exhaustion of anyone who considered opposing them. The Alliance's final report on human military capabilities concluded with a single recommendation: do not engage. Find alternative methods of conflict resolution. Offer them trade agreements, cultural exchanges, whatever they want. Just don't make them angry again. The treaty was signed on Earth in a city called Las Vegas, which the human negotiators claimed was perfect for international relations because everyone expects to lose something and have a good time doing it. During the signing ceremony, General Pike made one final statement to the assembled galactic representatives. I want you all to understand something important. This wasn't us being hostile. This wasn't us being aggressive. It was us being annoyed. If you really want to know why every species should dread the day humans go to war, consider this: everything you've seen, every impossible victory, every reality defying some strategy. That was us holding back. He smiled that distinctly human smile that had terrorized a galaxy. Because the truth is, we don't really go to war. War comes to us and then has to live with the consequences. And with that, humanity took its place among the galactic powers forever remembered as the species that had fought a war against the fundamental laws of military science and won. Not through superior force or technology, but through the simple expedient of refusing to acknowledge that anything was impossible. The galaxy had learned its lesson. When humans went to war, they didn't just win. They redefined what winning meant. And more importantly, they made sure that anyone who might consider fighting them in the future would remember one crucial fact. Humanity didn't fight by the rules because humanity was too busy rewriting them. Years later, Captain Rico would serve as a military attaché to Earth, where she spent her time trying to understand how humans maintained such a cheerfully chaotic society. She never quite figured it out, but she did learn to appreciate their coffee, their tendency to turn everything into a competition, and their inexplicable ability to find humor in situations that should rightfully terrify any rational being, and sometimes late at night. In her quarters, she would remember the war and wonder if perhaps the most frightening thing about humans wasn't their willingness to fight impossibly powerful enemies. It was their ability to make those enemies glad the war was over. After all, as the humans like to say, it's all fun and games until someone starts a war. And then it's even more fun because now there are dramatic stakes involved. The galaxy had learned to live with humanity, finding them reliable allies, creative partners, and absolutely terrible enemies. But they had also learned something else. The universe was a far more interesting place with humans in it, even if it was considerably more chaotic. And that, in the end, was exactly how humans liked it. The war had ended not with humanity's defeat, or even their total victory, but with the universe's grudging admission that yes, reality could work that way if you were stubborn enough to insist on it. And humanity, being humanity, had simply smiled and asked, so, what else can we convince to work differently? The answer, as the galaxy was still discovering, was absolutely everything. Because when humans went to war, they didn't just fight for victory. They fought for the right to rebuild the universe according to their own cheerfully anarchic vision. A universe where rubber ducks could be weapons, where bureaucracy could be weaponized, and where the most devastating tactic was often the one that made absolutely no sense until after it had worked. It was a universe that every species had learned to simultaneously dread and secretly admire. Because despite all the chaos, all the impossibility, all the complete abandonment of rational military doctrine. Humanity had proven one thing beyond doubt. Sometimes the best way to win a war is to convince your enemies that you're having more fun than they are. And as any human could tell you, once you start having fun with a problem, it stops being a problem and starts being an adventure. The universe was still trying to figure out if that was a good thing or not, but it had certainly made existence a lot more interesting. And in the end, the galaxy decided maybe that was enough.